You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Hello, John.
Hello, Norman.
Do you know what day today is?
It's Hump Day.
What? Yeah. I'm sorry. That will never get old for me. It may get old for everyone else, but not me. Maybe not John.
But you know what? But it's Mission Log Engage Day because practically every day is Mission Log Engage Day.
And
We're
why not?
always engaged by our listeners. Yeah.
We're engaged with each other. We're engaged with
Yes.
you. And we're certainly engaged with the amount of amazing emails and comments and everything that you send in to us that we review that are great, that are less than great, but are very thought provoking. Always.
Yes. Yep. And that is what we have today. We have an email, kind of one of those evergreen, kind of oldie but goodies that,
I like those.
yeah, dives into a lot here. And I think this will be fun to pick apart. So if you'll indulge me,
I shall indulge.
here we go.
This is
Uh,
from Mickey.
Yes, email from Mickey. So, oh wait, this is yours to read. My bad. Yeah, we alternate, and this is yours. I was just ready to dive in.
Well,
Go
this
to
one's
it,
from
man.
Mickey.
All right.
Thank you for all your time and efforts. The show is exceptional and it makes me look forward to Thursdays. I've been listening since the beginning and I look forward to hearing Voyager, Enterprise, the Kelvin Timeline, Discovery, and hopefully the Orville all to get the mission log treatment. That's why I hope Deep Space Nine isn't too frustrating for you as you examine episodes for the and M's, morals, meanings, and messages, of all the Star Trek series. With a possible exception of Disco Season 1, DS9 pushes Gene Roddenberry's story mandate the farthest. Rather than transporter accidents, alien possession, pond far, or flower spores, the conflict between the main characters of DS9 is genuine, and that absolutely seems out of character for officers of Starfleet given the ideals and legacy TOS and TNG established. And like any good commander promoted to captain, the responsibility for the actions of the show and crew fall to Sisko. So I'm writing to share my perspective and defense of Sisko and the general darker tone of the series. We only get glimpses of Benjamin prior to Wolf 359. I'd like to assume that he was an exemplary officer, but the events of that battle shook him, shook his principles, and shook his beliefs. His wife was taken, and he blames Captain Picard. He has not only has resentment and intense conflict with one fellow officer, but it taints and mars his interactions from then on. To me, DS9 asks the question, how do you come back from that? And perhaps its core story arc is the journey back to the ideals of what Starfleet of this era should represent. More than any other captain, I relate more to Sisko and his choices, as I'm far from their ideal era, but over time, he lays the path for how I too might get past dark times and past petty conflicts. Look, I'm sure this comes as no revelation. My intent is just to draw some attention away from single episodes and onto a larger picture so that moments early on in the show don't overly exasperate you. I and listeners like me really love what you do and don't want to see Mission Log become a chore for you. Basically, it gets better after it gets worse. So hold on, and soon enough, Voyager will take us far, far away from the troubles of Terok Nor. Much appreciation, Mickey.
So thank you, Mickey. Just a short little email with a lot to unpack. So we'll try to keep it brief here. And honestly, this email is well placed because I think it speaks to some of these themes that we had in the last two emails, and then some that have come up in our continued conversation about DS9, and specifically saving this now that we're at the end of our DS9 journey. It's kind of interesting to look back on it because while I agree with you, Mickey, absolutely about a few of the points that you make here, I think part of DS9's strength is the complexity and the imperfections of the characters that we get to know, and particularly meeting Sisko having this burden that he carries around. I mean, go back to that first episode. Why do you live here? You know, that it says all you need to know about that character, and it's immediately relatable because you understand how trauma haunts someone for their entire lives. And as far as interpersonal conflict on DS9, it's there. I think what makes DS9 very interesting is the mix of Starfleet and non-Starfleet. and the mix of human and alien characters all working together, because it's not just the cultural and species differences, it's also the hierarchical differences, the command order, the command structure differences that they all have. um, but they all work together well. They all come together as a team well. So I think that is one of, again, one of the many strengths of DS9. I think what's really challenging here about Mickey's email, because we've gotten to the very end of the show, the end of the series, is that you and I think, look at particularly Cisco's journey over the big picture. And when you get to the end of the series, you go, well, wait a minute. Is this series actually about him? Because there's very little of him as you get toward the end. The political and war stuff is fascinating and played out extremely well. There are other, the secondary characters who really come to the fore, really come into their own by the end of this. And I just wonder, given this complex character who walks around with this emotional burden on him, um, do we come away from it and go like, oh, well, that's the guy who did the best given what he's got, and was held accountable for his decisions, and we're okay with that, with where that story leaves us in at the very end? I'm still wrestling with that.
Mhm.
And I've read and heard very interesting arguments from people who say like, wow, this show did Cisco wrong at the end. And others who say like, no, that was the perfect ending. That's how it had to end. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around that argument too.
I think what Deep Space Nine did very well, it did really well, and that was explore a lot of these great characters, especially in the secondary cast. I think the
Mm-hmm.
secondary cast of characters, and I've said this before in the podcast, probably like the finest auxiliary cast, if you will, probably in any series that I've seen so far. I think where Deep Space Nine was very perplexing for me were moments where people have discussed its serialization. And I don't believe that Deep Space Nine actually was a very serialized show. Was it the most serialized Star Trek of its time? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, because TNG wasn't, aside from two-parters here and there.
Mm-hmm.
TOS certainly wasn't, aside from the Menagerie,
Yeah.
parts one and two, the only two-parter in TOS. So those were the only serialized stories that were available until Deep Space Nine. But what was difficult about going into Deep Space Nine was I was expecting day to day serialization of events, much like we saw from Penumbra to What You Leave Behind. That was perfectly serialized, albeit not some of the best work towards the end. But I think Deep Space Nine was very ambitious in trying to reframe Star Trek for a new audience and try and push the boundaries of not necessarily the final frontier, but the furthest frontier from, say, where we were comfortable of being in
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek, and how Starfleet would react to being constantly exposed to morally questionable cultures and characters. Garrick, Ducat, Quark.
Yeah.
Not necessarily Rom. We love Rom. But those types of characters that really kind of push the Starfleet ideal back against Starfleet. But where it comes to, say, Cisco's burden and how that may have painted his overall attitude towards his position, uh, in the station. Remember this: Captain Picard saw thousands of his fellow officers murdered by his hand, and he has to live with that. And
Yeah.
that was in season 3 and 4. But then he gives this wonderful speech to Wesley in season 6 in the first duty about personal truth.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying that every single person is going to react the same way, but if we're going to be isolating our counterpoints to the ideal characters, i.e., the captains of our shows, then I do believe those captains have to rise to that specific occasion because they are the paragons of our show and our crews. So I expect more from those characters than any other characters on the show.
With that said, Norman, I wonder in Mickey's email here where he says, more than any other captain, I relate more to Cisco and his choices as I'm far from their ideal era, but over time he lays the path for how I too might get past dark times and past petty conflicts. Getting past dark times, okay, I hear, he relies on his family until he doesn't, I guess at the very end. Spoiler. um, and I hope that getting past some of those times doesn't also mean hiding evidence. I hate to go there because, well, hey, look, we've run out of time. You are watching Mission Log Engage here on the Roddenberry Entertainment YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to that playlist. Please then send us your comments at missionlog@roddenberry.com and find us on Facebook and Twitter at MissionLogPod, and we may engage with your comments on the air.